Hi, and my name's David Toke, and I am a director of 100% Renewable UK, and this is our Green Buildings Seminar or webinar. And first, let's talk about what the government is doing or not doing, just to get this straight. Firstly, the only theme that they've got at the moment, the only hard piece of legislation that's an improvement on previous home standards, is the Future Home Standard, which reduces heating emissions by 30%. And you can essentially do that, to cut a longer story short, by put on solar panels, a heat pump, or fabric efficiency improvements. There is a fourth option, and that is gaslighting the planners, of course. So I'll leave that to the experts to say how much there is possibility for doing that. But anything on top of that, by the way, could everybody mute when they join? Anything on top of that is non-existent. There's lots of PR chaff flying around about what the government might do. There's talk of 75% emissions reductions from 2025, but there is no legislation on that. They say they might introduce it in 2024. Well, an intention is not fact, I'm afraid. And we've seen in the past few days the government churning out lots of statements about what they're going to do, ranging from all sorts of fantastic and maybe not so wonderful plans amongst them. But until something is legislation, we can't rely on it, no matter how many thousands of words have been put into policy documents. And there have been certainly thousands of words spread around. So that's the reason for this campaign. Could people, by the way, make sure they're muted? And what I want to do now is to open the discussion to other people. And I want to introduce the first speaker, which is Jonathan Porritt. After we've had the speakers, after Jonathan Porritt, we'll have Lucy Pedler from the Green Register. We'll have Beccy Smart from the Environmental Housing Campaign. And then we'll have myself, Charmian Larke, and then followed by myself. Okay, are you ready, Jonathan?
Sure am, yep.
Are you doing your screen share?
I'm not doing any PowerPoint or anything, David.
Because at the moment my screen's gone blank. Anyway,
right.
Could you start off your talk? Can you see stuff?
I can see you, and I can see lots of other participants. So
right, okay, so it's a problem with my screen. Okay, can you
sure.
start off then, please?
Happily. And yes, congratulations, David, on organizing this event and in keeping the campaign going, which you've been doing steadfastly now for a couple of years. It's really important, more important now than ever, I would suggest, in terms of what's happening in Ukraine right now. And of course, we now have the prospect of a new strategy, yet more words, David, coming from government, either by the end of next week or by the end of the week after, depending on who you believe. The delays are apparently a lot to do with whether or not the government is going to give in to those swivel-eyed extremists in the net zero scrutiny group by including a reference to fracking. And this is going back and forth between number 10, Bays, and so on. Fracking is honestly not there and won't actually make any difference whatsoever, as we all know. But of course, in this new independence strategy, there will be lots of references to renewables, which will be good, particularly wind and solar, and lots of references to nuclear, which of course is not good. There will also be, I'm absolutely certain, a renewed commitment to encourage further development of gas in the North Sea. What there won't be, apparently, is any reference whatsoever to a new position around retrofit, energy efficiency, housing, fuel poverty, and so on. There seems to be a complete blank on that score. So this webinar is really timely because it does remind us that it's not all gloom out there. Solar Energy UK brought out its figures recently about what was happening in 2021, and it's in many respects pretty more rooftop solar installed in 2021 than in the preceding 6 years. Out of the total of 14 gigawatts of solar here in the UK, something like 5 gigawatts is rooftop solar, mostly industrial and commercial rather than residential, but nonetheless, that number is growing all the time. And as you said, David, the Future Home Standard will almost certainly encourage further development in that area. So this is a pretty exciting territory. I've never read a press release from Solar Energy UK, which was more upbeat about the prospects for solar now, and really keen, of course, to press ahead with getting the government to commit to a target for 40 gigawatts by 2030, which would certainly help give that remaining signal, if we need it, to the industry. Wind power also very much on the up at the moment. Even Bayes now talking positively about onshore wind. Can you believe that? After more than a decade of totally ignorant bias against onshore, the cheapest form of providing renewable electricity in this country. Now, at long last, ministers seem to have got a grip on that particular issue all over again. And this was confirmed recently in a very interesting report from ECIU, looking at the degree of savings that have been achieved for consumers by investment in wind power and investment, by the way, in energy efficiency in homes. And these savings for consumers are quite significant. So the ECIU's report is indicating that by the end of next year, homeowners will be benefiting to the tune of £85 a year as a consequence of our investments in wind power. Now, against the backdrop of £3,000 to £3,500 a year average bills, maybe £85 is a small drop in the bucket, but it's certainly a big drop, and it's a very symbolic drop from my perspective, because it shows exactly what could be happening if we pushed on a lot further. We know that solar, onshore, offshore, as our renewables, are the fastest new generating technologies to install and the cheapest. So why there should be any further delay on that score is a mystery, frankly. That still leaves the poor relation in this whole debate, as many of you on this call will understand, which is the question of what we do about the appalling quality housing stock in this country. 19 million out of 29 million homes fall below category C in terms of energy efficiency, so they're D or below. And that, of course, is a consequence of a decade of dereliction, really, where the government has simply neglected this whole area, has shown no real strategic interest in it whatsoever. Home retrofits, 90% down, 90% down since 2012. Despite that, and despite this sort of policy neglect, this again is an area where individuals across the country have been able to make significant savings as a consequence of the home retrofits that have gone on. The ECIU's report talks of at least £1.15 billion worth of savings for those who were able to find a way of doing a proper retrofit scheme through whatever it was, whatever means they could. This decade of dereliction is pretty painful for people in the UK. We're now looking at 3.7 million people already in fuel poverty in the UK, with every indication, slightly different projections being put out by different organizations, but every indication that it'll be much closer to 5 million people in fuel poverty, many of them in those 19 million really poor quality homes by the end of the year, as a consequence of the dramatic hike in electricity and gas prices. So for people in this country, it's an utterly grim scene. So none of that will be of any surprise to people on this call, because we've lived with this for a very long time. And of course, what the government is saying now is that it doesn't have the means to pay for anything more, notwithstanding the commitment in the Conservative Party manifesto in 2019 to £19 billion to be put into the improvement of the built environment, and in particular, poor quality housing stock in the UK. There's such an obvious way of dealing with this, it just beggars belief. The call from the NGOs that came out with a recommendation to the Chancellor last week was for at least £9 billion, additional £9 billion between now and 2025. And that is not a lot of money for this government to find, not least because it doesn't necessarily need to find the money itself. It could charge the UK Infrastructure Bank with a commitment to follow up on this as an infrastructure priority, as was recommended by the Infrastructure Commission itself under the chairmanship of Sir John Armitt. And it could obviously do what it is clearly very reluctant to do, which would be to introduce a windfall tax on the profits of large oil and gas companies for the duration, for the next 2 to 3 years. Their windfalls are going to stay that high for 2 to 3 years. And this would easily get us to £9 billion per annum through to 2025 without the taxpayer being asked for any additional funding whatsoever. When quizzed about this, Rishi Sunak said he was reluctant to do that, to put in the windfall tax. Why? Guess what? Because it would discourage those big oil and gas companies from further investment in the North Sea, which of course is exactly what we want: less investment in the North Sea and far more investment in homegrown renewables and energy efficiency. But you wouldn't expect joined up thinking like that in the brain of our Chancellor, I'm sorry to say. I'll leave it there, David.
Thanks, Jonathan. Great overview there. And now we want to get down to a few specifics about green buildings. And so over to you, Lucy Pedler from the Green Register. I'll let you introduce yourself, and you can share your screen from now. If you could work out how to do it.
Thank you very much. Just getting up on the screen. So good morning, everybody, and thank you, Jonathan, for a really good introduction. I can tell from your tone how frustrated you are. It's, the solution's right here with us. If you just look at solar, there's more solar energy that lands on the surface of the earth every day than any human being will ever need. We just haven't got the willpower or interest or vested interest of preventing us from using it. So my presentation today is about what the Green Register does to try and address this issue, but we look at this from a holistic point of view, not just renewables. Renewables is very much something that we are very supportive of. Jonathan's already mentioned about the very poor quality existing buildings. So just by way of introduction, I'm an architect. I've got a very small design and development company here in Bristol, but my real passion is sustainable building. So 22 years ago, I started the Green Register. We're a not-for-profit training organisation. We provide a sustainable building to all disciplines of the construction industry and have done for the last 22 years. And the really importance is that we're independent, so we don't usually get any funding from exterior sources, so we can tell it how it is, just like Jonathan has done. So referring to the 100% renewables campaign, should all new buildings have solar panels and low carbon heating? Absolutely yes, but there's a big but from our point of view. And that is various things that I'm going to cover very briefly today, only if the building fabric is robust and well built. If it's not, we'll get more energy loss, more energy required to heat those buildings and cool and light them. So if we don't have good quality building, we'll be needing more energy to keep us comfortable. We're not generating 100% of our electricity from renewables yet, but as Jonathan has alluded to, we're on our way. And from our point of view, we need a skilled workforce and a holistic approach. So I have been in the construction industry for over 40 years, and I'm afraid to say that this is very typical, this kind of shockingly bad building practice on building sites. And the problem is that it gets away with. So we don't have resources in building control to be able to have good site inspections. They've also got competition with private companies, inspectors. So non-compliant buildings get built every day of the year here in the UK because we don't have sufficient compliance. There is also a mismatch between supply and demand. So there's much more demand for homes than there is supply. So people can build a shoebox in the middle of the road. If it's somewhere that somebody wants their kids to go to school, they'll buy it. It doesn't really matter about the quality. And just to show you quite how easy it is to build bad quality buildings, this is a really good study that was done by the Institute of Building Physics, which demonstrated how small gaps in the external envelope can make really significant heat loss. This is a square metre of an external envelope. This is an unbroken vapour check, 140 mil of insulation. And the design U value is 0.3. So for those of you on the call that aren't familiar with U values, it's a measure of heat loss, and the lower the value, the better. Somebody comes along and cuts a 1 millimetre gap in that previously unbroken vapour check, and it's 1 millimetre wide. And unfortunately, these gaps exist everywhere in building. They're unintended, but they are there everywhere, whether it's up against the frame to the insulation, they are everywhere. So when you get just a 1 millimetre gap in the walls, the floor of the roof, instead of getting your design U value of 0.3, you've reduced it by a performance factor of nearly 5. So there immediately you have a non-compliant building, nobody's picked it up. And so most of the buildings, apart from Passive House, are non-compliant, I would say, in the UK. I go back to the point I made about if we're not building robust buildings, energy will be lost and will require more. Even if it's generated from renewables, it has an impact. Obviously, there's manufacturing energy, embodied energy in renewables, but we don't need to use this extra energy if we build better. There's also an increase in demand for energy because we're building so badly. You know, I come from London. Before I left, I saw ever impossible sites being built, you know, single aspect, as this shows, with solar gain, with no mitigation against overheating. People get too hot in the summer, temperatures are going up, they go down to B&Q, they buy an air conditioner, which is at least 50% likely to be using electricity generated from fossil fuels. This has come from a fantastic range of free guides, by the way. The Zero Carbon Hub, which was nixed back in 2010, the wisdom of Cameron, I really don't understand, but he nixed it. But there is a legacy website called Buildings Hub, and they show you the solutions too. So it's not just here's all the problems, there's solutions. So overheating is a big issue for us in the UK. Now I've added to this line here low carbon sources, because what we often mix up is renewable energy technologies and low carbon energy technologies. They're not quite the same. So when we talk about low carbon energy, what we're hoping, the people on this call anyhow, that it's renewables, and we are rapidly transitioning to energy generation from renewables. But this is down the road from me. This is Hinkley Point C. Most of my friends just hope this is going to be an eye-wateringly expensive white elephant, because by the time it is finished, hopefully we won't need it. We won't need nuclear. But it's often included when people talk about low carbon energy, because they think nuclear is low carbon. Now, we're not burning fossil fuels, but there is a heck of a lot of energy in nuclear, quite aside from the waste. And again, as Jonathan alluded to, you know, because of the absolute humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, the government here is suddenly talking about energy independence. Unfortunately, it doesn't just mean renewables. They're talking about a four-prong attack, which is renewables, energy efficiency, opening up North Sea oil, and making friends with the Saudis again, and increasing nuclear. So we distinguish between low carbon technologies and renewable technologies. So low carbon technologies are at the top here, renewable technologies, you know, it is what it says on the tin, if it's renewable from a renewable resource. And I'll come back to heat pumps. Let's see. That's because heat pumps are sold as the answer to heating. And most of you will know that sort of 10 years ago, the carbon intensity of electricity was very high, relevant compared to gas. And that's because most of our electricity was generated from fossil fuels. You jump 10 years and there's almost parity now, which is why heat pumps are being sold as a low carbon solution, because heat pumps use electricity. If the electricity is generated from renewables, it's considered a low carbon solution. And that is indeed why the government may or may not ban gas boilers in new homes by 2025. You know, we use more than 3/4 of our heating comes from gas. So this is a very significant thing we need to look at. And it's a bit sort of grandmother and eggs situation here. You'll probably all know this, but it's a really good news story in the UK. You know, back 6 years ago, about 25% of our electricity generation was renewables. 2 years later, it was 33%. PV panels have dropped dramatically because of the feed-in tariffs. We're going days in a row, if not weeks in a row, without burning coal. We've got the world's largest offshore wind farm planned in the North Sea. This was the latest figure I could find. We're up to 42% of the UK's electricity generated by renewables. And then interestingly, they include water and wood here. So what we do at the Green Register is we train people to understand this, and we train people to apply this knowledge in buildings, both new build and retrofit. So we teach the fabric first approach, the whole building approach. We look at what's best per pound spent. So not always very expensive, shiny technology, but what can actually improve the, you know, something like loft insulation, very unsexy, very low carbon, very low cost for carbon saved. And then we suggest renewables if the budget allows, and they often are these days. So renewables is very much on our radar, but we're also very aware that a lot of clients don't have a lot of money. And in terms of best carbon saved per pound spent, fabric first is the first line. So when we look at the whole house approach, we teach about heat loss and we teach about tightening up our buildings. But if you do both of those, you have to think about moisture control, because moisture is in buildings, it's in the air. We have to be able to avoid the risks that moisture can do to damage buildings. That's called the whole building approach. Now, about 3 years ago, we were funded by BEIS to run a scheme we call Future Proof. It was with our partners, the Centre for Sustainable Energy, who I mentioned earlier. And we designed some training for tradespeople, builders, contractors in sustainable building. It was very successful. We had some really positive results. As with most things, the funding was stopped, but we are carrying on Future Proof Point 2 to design more training for the skilled workforce, to skill up the workforce. And interestingly, we're now working with further education colleges in the West to train the future builders, plasterers, brickies, electricians, and so on. We're teaching them not to do this. So the disaster that was the Green Deal was the government throwing heaps of money at the problem without any understanding of the technical issues. Lots of people who didn't know what they were doing would throw a lot of insulation up on an existing building without any regard for detailing, often made the building worse. So we teach about how to improve walls without getting to this point. We talk about appropriate use of renewable technologies. So don't put a building mounted wind turbine on a roof in the middle of town, because it will probably remain static most of the time, which isn't a good message for us to be generating, and it probably generates the amount of energy it takes to light the sign that says that there are wind turbines in this building. We teach about photovoltaics, all the amazing ways that you can apply photovoltaics. It's a really creative developing market, from sunscreens to cladding to wind farms and so on. We also teach that, you know, the clue is in the title. It's a solar panel. It needs sun, so don't spend a lot of money on expensive solar roof tiles and then put it on the north face of a building where it's in the shade all the time. We also talk about post-occupancy monitoring, making sure that the technology works. So one of the types of solar panels is called evacuated tubes. This was the spec for it. This is what actually happened. So incorrect orientation, and a third of the tubes were upside down. So a third of the cost of that was for completely pointless evacuated tubes. So this was resolved as part of the building performance evaluation, but we also need to teach what happens once you've done the work, how to make sure it works properly. So should all new buildings have solar panels and low carbon heating? Absolutely yes, with these caveats. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And I can see I'm going to watch that recording over and over again, and hopefully everybody else when we get this properly published. Right, so and now over to Beccy Smart, who's going to talk about an environmentally conscious housing development policy campaign, and also perhaps ways in which this Green Buildings campaign could use the tactics that you've done to such good effect. So over to you, Beccy.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I just remembered to take my mute off. That's a good start. So I'm just going to read out from my notes, because I absolutely hate speaking like this. I hate public speaking. I'm ridiculous. I'm a really behind the scenes person. I'm a professional photographer by trade, so that's my excuse for my speaking. Anyway, so hello everybody. I just want to say I do feel really honoured to be here, and thanks David for inviting me, and especially so talking in the same meeting as Jonathan Porritt. So I'm an independent environmental campaigner, and I'm running the national petition to halt harmful housing with a new eco-planning law. And it's now at 57,000 signatures and rising. So why did I start the petition? That is quite simply to get a bold new planning law. As David said at the beginning of the meeting, without strong law, nothing can really change, and nothing will change. So building at scale will not change without an eco-planning law. We need one which encompasses all our cutting edge knowledge and technology, so we build sustainably and protect the natural environment for food, wildlife, carbon cutting and well-being, for our right to a healthy environment, and that is a right by the UN. We need to give a voice to the electorate who are rightly horrified by the unstoppable and unmanageable wide-scale natural habitat destruction through bad planning and bad building. There have already been too many decades of this. I also wanted to create transparency and to join the dots together between the Climate Emergency Declaration, the Environmental Act 2021, and the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, which has so many loopholes, it's like a cold jumper or a circus act. How can such bad building continue over our carbon sinks? How is this still allowed? We need environmental homes, low energy only, in build, scale, and location. So my learning journey over the last few years about this environmental destruction was firstly internationally focused via Facebook, and my horror of it grew by the day. I also have for a long time watched, as probably many others, in dismay as the same old 1980s style badly built houses keep being built in volume on our most pristine farms and countryside. And even though we receive official report after report with grave warning after grave warning, including the state of nature, IPCC reports, our declarations of climate emergencies globally, yet still farms, ancient woodlands, meadows, and mature trees aren't protected, not really. And the renewable energy technology for housing and building is not mandatory. The government are acting against their declaration like this isn't an emergency. So for campaigning confidence, I've been very inspired by Greta Thunberg. I'm sure everyone's familiar with her, a 16-year-old protesting on her own outside the Swedish parliament. She has arguably raised the profile of environmental emergency more than any other person, creating a global movement for the Fridays for Future. So Greta's quote on changing the rules: "We can't save the world by playing by the rules, because the rules have to be changed. Everything needs to change, and it has to start today." Also instrumental to my campaign work, which I think you want to hear about a little bit, is joining with Facebook, the Facebook groups. So these are really instrumental, and I would recommend for campaign work, that's what you do. There are hundreds and hundreds of grassroots Facebook groups across the country for bad housing, and this has been pivotal for what's happened with my campaign. So connecting with caring and motivated, mainly, others in their thousands. These groups on average have a couple of thousand each group. So some of the groups that I've been in over the last few years include Eco Cops. They have 2,500 people. The Green Party. Closer to home, I joined a Facebook group a lady started to save Canterbury's Wincheap water meadows. So they're historic, beautiful water meadows that the council, of course, wanted to concrete over into making it into a car park. It seemed like a hopeless campaign. It seemed like we were all just going to share our sadness only. But incredibly, from the action that was taken from the group and protests, we saved these water meadows. It was amazing. And I think that's the thing. Once you take action and you get some successes, it spurs you on. You realize what you can do when you connect with others. You simply just have to connect, make a little plan, take some action, raise the awareness, and you can defeat the bad decisions. On a much smaller level, but also we saved a cherry blossom tree in our local park, a very beautiful mature tree. Again, it seemed absolutely hopeless at the start. It just seemed like we were going to only share our frustrations and sadness, but with a bit of action and planning, we saved it. Raising awareness is key to getting the public support to get the political change. So another group that I joined was Stop the Destruction of Kent group. That's, again, 2,500 people. And in this group, there were people repeatedly calling for a petition because, again, daily you share your sadness, you share pictures of the destruction from the volume house builders, people's despair. That's all very well and good because that creates a feeling and the feeling drives you into the action. But without converting the feeling into an action, it can be a bit circular. So that's where I decided nobody else was doing it. How long are we going to wait? Now it's already too late. So I gathered together some other like-minded people I'd come across and to bounce some ideas off for the petition, and got on with writing the petition. And I don't know whether you've actually read the petition, but it's quite involved. I mean, it's got the top line, the top call is obviously for an eco planning law, but the policy points within that, what that should be, you know, I didn't want to miss a thing. So and this is all in a bid to save nature, to save wildlife, and to stop the mass destruction of our countryside and our carbon sinks. So shining a strong light on this bad building and the destruction that goes with it, and to try and stop the algorithm from being just an academic strategy rolled out by those hiding behind their desks. I'm now supported by CPRE Kent and volunteering with them. And I have to say that they are a really important established network to work with for environmental housing only demands, because it's hard work creating networks. It's hard work putting all this in place. And it's really important to buddy up with existing networks and organizations, and obviously to try and bring us all together. I think David touched upon that, how, you know, XR is amazing, the courage, the creativity and the attention they get, but there can be the connection between lobbying groups who do it the more traditional way. We need to, all of us need to come together, all of us. So just to flag, it's not all perfect being online and Facebook. It can be a very fickle friend, and there are always underminers and naysayers, and who knows if they have vested interests or if it's just ego issues, but I see them like punctures to the wheel of momentum. They are the delayers, and be wary of them. The building lobby. but it's important to be inclusive, but if people are really saying the opposite to what the action that needs to be taken, they need to be dropped, they need to be removed. They are literally punctures, and it's really important for people's confidence and momentum to see positivity and to see leadership and direction. So yeah, I have no time for lack of action people. As we know, it's late already to take the bold environmental action to change our systems. So yeah, my advice would be for campaigning to create a public Facebook group. So that's really important to make the article shareable, has far greater reach. Don't be scared by the idea that it's public, because a private group can only take you so far. It's a bit of a dead end in the end. Make sure you join relevant other Facebook groups. Once you're in that group, mini posters are a really amazing way to put short, clear calls to action on them. I created a mini poster, and I think that's when my petition really took off, when I put, I can share it afterwards, but carbon zero housing, you only get a limited amount of space to write in, but it's really important, these mini posters on Facebook. Twitter is also important because it has incredible reach and you can access so many people, but don't be dismayed if you get absolutely no response. I've barely got a like for my post there, but I'm pretty sure that that's been a big tool for getting the petition out there. So if anyone has any questions, maybe you can ask me at the end, because we're probably going to move on to the next speaker. And if anyone is interested, there is actually going to be a publicity presentation of the petition on Westminster's green spaces next Tuesday. So I've got a photo call press release. If anyone would like me to send that to you, then just maybe put your email address in the messages chat and I can collect it from there, because I'm sure that will be saved hopefully afterwards. Yeah, well, I hope that covers it. Yeah, my press release definitely covers it, so that can be shared afterwards as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Becky. If you can share that press release and some excellent ideas, which I'm thinking about there. Yes, we could work on that. And yes, good luck with getting some traction with the MPs and the lords and ladyships. And I don't know where you get the time to do all that, but that's really fantastic.
Yeah, taking a lot of time.
So on to one of our directors of 100% Renewable UK, Charmian Larke, who is the CEO of Atlantic Energy in Cornwall also, and she is going to be talking about green energy and fuel poverty, or avoiding fuel poverty. Charmian, are you with us?
I am indeed, but I'm going to need help to get to do the screen share bit. I've got some slides ready, but I don't know how to do screen share.
Well, basically, you go down to the bottom where it says screen share and you share it.
What will appear?
You will see several things on the screen and you click on the one you want to share.
Right, okay, thank you. Let's go.
There we are.
Slide share. Sorry, I want to get to a probable. Is that right? Have we got to a single slide now? Can everyone hear me okay? I see.
That'll do, far away.
Right, thank you. Right, so as David said, green buildings and fuel poverty is the topic. I've got a few slides, but I will try and whiz through them fairly quickly, as it's all going to be short stuff. So a bit of background, the UK is the lowest level of insulation and building quality in Europe. The Committee on Climate Change has said that something like 29 million existing homes need upgrading and potentially 1.7 million new homes by 2030. Because we know that by 2030 we need to have had a 45% reduction in our emissions. Not doing anything about existing homes is not going to meet that requirement. Plus, of course, we now know we've all been talking about the New World situation, Russian invasion. And allied to that, partly due to that, but also other issues, we've got rapidly increasing fuel and food prices, which some people like the New Economic Forum, Foundation Forum, NEF, say will drive 8 million people into fuel poverty, and that is a really serious issue. So a bit more on fuel poverty, something like in 2020, the government's figures showed 13.4% of households are in fuel poverty, but they define A to C rated homes as not being fuel poor. So it doesn't matter if someone...
Charmian, sorry to break in here, but can you click on down your slides? We've only got the front one at the moment.
Well, I've got them here in front of me. I don't know what to do then, other than...
There we are.
Right, so I can't do a full screen thing for you then.
No, you're okay. As long as we can see them, that's fine.
Can people see those all right? I don't know if I've now got the text big enough to read.
That's all right.
It's all right, okay. So the government way of working out fuel poverty is that all A to C rated homes are not fuel poor. So that says nothing about the people who live in them. They might have reasonable quality homes, but if they have no income, I'd suggest that they are fuel poor. So my thought is that actually there's a lot more fuel poor people than the government figures suggest. So in 2019, there were about 22% of people in poverty and 2.4 million destitute. Now that's from, I think it's the London Poverty Forum. The destitution figure is £70 or less income a week. I certainly wouldn't like to try living on that. I mean, I've been homeless. I know what it's like. It's not fun. And of course, the pandemic's made it worse because of people being thrown out of work, and there's a whole rent issue going on there. And worse again, rapidly rising energy costs. So a bit of background on energy policy, because we know it's now on a pivot and has already been spoken, particularly by Jonathan. We're expecting the energy policy or energy supply policy to change. I would suggest it needs to go back to the energy trilemma, which is probably showing my age because that was around for a long time ago. But the original idea, and worked for a while, was energy needs to be affordable, so that helps deal with the fuel poverty issue. It needs to be secure, which is the thing they're all going about right now. And of course, we all know it needs to be low carbon or zero carbon if we can get there. But when you look at their actions so far, of course, they're not, the present government is not in its head keen on doing things to help people. But if we look at what they promised, which is the 2019 manifesto, I think as Jonathan's already mentioned, a certain amount of decarb houses altogether, but they promised 3.8 billion to decarb social housing, which is about £1,000 per social housing unit, just for England. And the Wave 1 competition, I the first one to provide some money on that, closed October 21 with £160 million available to spend for local authorities. So it's not really going anywhere. And of course, the renewable heat incentive has been changing from a tariff availability, which provide for total capital costs to come back over 7 or 8 years, has now been changed to a grant upfront, £5,000 or £6,000, depending on whether it's air source or ground source heat pumps. So for those who are less well off, that is not very helpful, particularly with rising electricity costs, although that has to be balanced against rising gas costs. Now, I have to admit, I don't know a huge amount of gas. I've been living in a rural area of Cornwall for a long time, and 50% of homes in Cornwall do not have gas. And our house is heated by wood. And my husband's getting very fed up with cutting wood. So we had a quote recently for a ground source heat pump, and it was just so expensive. So looking at existing homes, it's already been mentioned some of the things that really need doing, but a bit of background. The assumption is from certainly the Climate Change Committee that 80% of homes, existing homes, will still be in use in 2050. And of course, we all know they've got low insulation and a lot of them are on gas, very high proportion, much more in the cities, obviously, than rural areas. And I'm told, I talked to our local fuel poverty person about this issue before I wrote this, and he tells me that a lot of hot water tanks have been taken out because of instantaneous combi boilers. And that means it makes it really hard to then put heat pumps in because you've got the extra cost of installing a new hot water tank. Or you've got to have an instantaneous water heater, which increases the operating cost. And also apparently the fuel pool cannot afford to use heat pump systems because it's daytime electricity, they're on the economy 7, or it's into the gas boilers. And at the moment, electricity costs more than gas. We know that's likely to change, but and also, of course, to make a heat pump work well, you've got to increase your insulation. I've got an example from a relative recently who's on dual fuel. 2 days ago, she had a thing from her supplier, expected £960 a year at the moment to go to £3,000 a year, which is causing her a lot of distress. So how are we going to get this retrofitting happen? Well, there's an interesting BRE, Building Research Establishment report from last year on the social cost of poor housing. And in particular, the highest cost is down to cold homes. So it costs the NHS nearly £1 billion a year in first year direct costs for treatment. That's not including any on costs of people who are seriously ill for a long time. The total social costs, they reckon, is 15 billion. That's just for the cold homes. That's not for the other things wrong with homes. The cost to retrofit is about 6 billion in what they're suggesting, which gives less than 6 months cost payback to society. Brilliant activity that. And 6.7 years direct NHS payback against a total budget of 190 billion a year. So one might think, actually, let's widen out the remit and put a small amount from the NHS budget into, or add to the NHS budget, because it wouldn't cost a huge amount. And you could do a huge amount with NHS costs and admissions to hospital and so on. So that's one approach. Whether the government can think that out of the box way, I don't know, but we can always hope. Another option potentially is citizen-led retrofit. So that's where local groups get together and they do it as a community. And that's been doing really well in Tipperary. There's a community energy group there. And they said the best thing to do is do it as a whole community, which reduces costs. You build the networks together, you use local skills and you improve skills. And you also improve the community as a whole. But it's helping the homeowners get any grant funding that's appropriate and get proper contractors, because we all know the building industry is not the best in the world. So there is some government action to reduce carbon in homes for new build, but that's only 20% of homes by 2050. So as David's already said, Homes for the Future is not a big leap towards zero carbon. It's only part of the way we need to go. Another issue is that new homes are very small. I hate it when I see all the new homes with little boxes, not even any gardens or anything. But they often don't have room for a hot water tank. So how you get heat pumps going in those properties when there's no room for a hot water tank, it's difficult. And it does appear that volume builders have undue influence on housing standards. I do remember that something like 10 years was spent building up a zero carbon homes policy or standards. And at the end of 2050, the present, not the present administration, the Conservative government cut it when it was about to come in on the 1st of January 2016. And they'd spent 10 years building out, and I just thought, yeah, you give up almost. But also the structure of the building industry doesn't help, because a lot of the volume builders, they subcontract, the subcontractors subcontract, and you've got people who are not trained, who don't know what they're doing and have no interest in the quality of the work they're doing. So, for example, not joining up insulation between the walls and the loft, and there's gaps there. And a friend of mine had new home, volume builder, big, when he did the thermal camera around his house, he could see the gaps, and it wasn't heating the house properly. The house wasn't being heated properly. So fuel poverty and rooftop PV, which is the key thing we've been thinking about. As energy prices are rising rapidly, particularly electricity prices, of course, so that does help with reduced costs for the property owner or property user. So the Energy Savings Trust suggests that a 3.5 kilowatt system would save £300 a year. That can reduce electricity bill and some sales. But the way the prices are going, I think from calculations, this could be raising a value of £550 to £700 a year, or more if the prices go up. But then you've still got to find out how to pay for the upfront cost. So there are some grant schemes, for example, in Cornwall, with Happy Energy. I think they're national actually, but for Cornwall, they've got a £6 million grant for PV systems. This is for poorer households who are on benefits or have very low income. But the money gives you 1,200 systems. So we need more of that. And then if you did one of these blue sky calculations, that if all fuel poor households have PV, that's the houses, not the flats. I haven't done a calculation for that flats. You would get another 3% of our electricity from renewables, which would be good. So in summary, it does help, having PV on the roof does help in the long run to reduce energy bills, and obviously it cuts carbon. But it's vital to work on increasing action, which helps with increasing health. Cold towns are not good for the health. Reducing NHS costs, as I've already shown, we all know it reduces emissions. It also helps the housing stock last longer because it's not falling down with mould and such like. It does create a lot of employment by getting on and doing the retrofit. And if it's done at a community level, it does increase local social coherence. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Charmian. Really great amount of detail there. And we'll have to have your presentation and circulated, well, put on our websites. That's fantastic, Charmian. And now back to me for some concluding comments, or at least to take things on before we revert to a more general discussion. And so first, a little bit about 100% Renewable UK. It was formed 2 years ago, and the central aims are, as what it says on the label: we can't have fossil fuels. Nuclear interferes with renewables and endangers global nuclear weapons proliferation, as people use nuclear power as a cover for nuclear weapons. What we do, we provide briefings, blogs and reports about green energy issues connected to progress towards this objective. And we're currently producing 100% Renewable UK model with researchers from LUT University in Finland, which is funded by a variety of fundraising means, including 2/3 funding from the Greenpeace Environmental Trust. And I'd urge you to join the email group. And before I go any further, please send letters to your MPs about this campaign for mandatory solar PV and bans on fossil fuels in new buildings. Please write to your MP about this if you haven't already. Join our email group, and you can also click on to receive postings from our website, by the way, if you look on our page. But just a little bit about, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. What does 100% Renewable UK? It means maximising onshore and offshore solar and wind resources. We need to provide some storage, which going to be modelling done from using hydrogen from produced from renewable energy used in low NOx gas turbines. And we'll have to produce synthetic fuels to power aircraft whilst electric planes are being developed. But back more to the central point, which is solar PV and heat pumps are cheap in new buildings. And Charmian said how a lot of new buildings, new homes being built too small. Well, under buildings that have to provide heat pumps, you will design your building around that. So it'll be a lot cheaper and easier to do them. People building estates will be able to get a lot of savings through bulk purchase. You can save a lot of money simply because you don't have to replace an existing system like you've got with this rather expensive retrofit system. I mean, it's good. I mean, I've got one recently, but it's far better if it's installed in buildings when they're built in the first place. They can be designed to take them. You save a lot of costs that way. And better fabric efficiency in the new buildings mean that smaller sizes of equipment are needed compared to older buildings, apart from all the other things that Lucy has been talking about. And of course, builders have an incentive to reduce costs. Whereas, look, I don't mean to criticize heat pump installers. They're trying to make a living, but they don't have the same incentive structure. They, of course, want to make money out of the installation. So there's a different incentive structure there. And regulatory costs are much less if you're building new buildings, installing heat pumps and putting solar panels on them to cut a fair amount of other detail short. So it's a hell of a lot cheaper. And I thought the website that it shouldn't make new houses more than 4% more expensive having these mandatory solar PV and heat pumps. It should actually be less than that, with bulk purchase being used by house builders, I think. And as the supply chain gets better and skills become better, more of it, you should get that down to 3%. Green energy strategies get cheaper as time goes on. Please spread word about petition. Write to your MP in support of their campaign and get other people to do it, and look for sympathetic MPs. We've had one or two points of sympathy. I think Marianne Birkby from Cumbria has identified and got some responses from Tim Farron. Tim Farron, the former Liberal Democrat leader, has been quite supportive. We want to get MPs to organise an adjournment debate, for instance. Anyhow, that's all I've got to say for the moment. As I say, repeat, write to your MP about this. And if you're interested in 100% Renewable UK, please join our email group and sign up to get our postings and so on. And we'll be thinking about Beccy Smart's suggestions for how to broaden and get more support for this campaign. And thanks for everybody who's coming, but we're not finished yet, because I invite people to make some chat box comments. So has anybody got any questions? Please tell us. I can see a couple of them. Is the solar petition campaign on Twitter? Yes, you bet. It said it, yes. In Mendip, somebody said anyway, I'll have to go back.
Sorry, Dave. What is it then on Twitter? So we've all got it.
Oh, well, I send lots of Twitter messages. I mean, it's not a pinned campaign, but I've sent lots of messages about it. Probably not done properly. You can tell me how to do it properly.
So you send them from your sort of personal account. It's not like a campaign Twitter account.
No, it's not a campaign Twitter account. No.
That might be a good idea.
Campaign Twitter account, yes.
It could really help push things along.
Thanks for that. Yes, right. I'll look to do that. Yes. Somebody, Rick Greenup. Now, Rick Greenup said, as user of a heat pump, I agree the price difference between electrical energy and gas is a real problem for the government's stated ambition to install 600,000 heat pumps per year. Considering the plans to make electricity cheaper by putting a social obligation parts onto the gas bill instead, there really is no future in making gas more expensive, at least in the short term. And people will freeze. I can only imagine a national program of subsidised retrofit actually working. Actually, else is too slow, but how to get a subsidised retrofitting programme past Steve Baker and his chums in the Daily Mail. Well, our in response to that, our campaign is specifically about new build, and one shouldn't sneeze at that, because that means between 200,000 and 300,000 a year, which would take us more or less halfway towards this government target already. And the point about doing that is you create a lot of skills and a lot of supply chain improvements, which then spill over to help the retrofit market. And actually now, because of the massive increases in gas prices, actually the operating cost of running a heat pump is now less than gas now, with the price increases coming in April. That's sad, the fact that there's so big house increases, but it is no longer, it is now cheaper to run a heat pump. And provided they run efficiently, and they should. I know mine does. We moved into a relatively older house a few months ago. We got a heat pump, and it really is cut down bills by over 70%. I don't see something special about our place, so I don't believe this nonsense you hear. I have been installed in very old buildings, I'll grant you, and people have used the advantage there to heat their homes better, which reduces the coefficient of performance. Sorry, but you know, I mean, it's win-win-win, really. I'm much more enthusiastic about this. Anyhow, sorry. Other comments? And Rick says, I can verify 100%. I can 100% verify Dave's figure of 40% of the price of new build to add solar PV and a heat pump at the build stage. Also, it's quite true this 4% has been dwarfed by the subsequent rise in the value of our home. I must say, yeah, having had a brief conversation with you, Rick, you're just doing a one-off as well. Imagine if you're doing several houses at once, or more, and you can really get a lot of savings through bulk purchase and various other things. So, and as time goes on, as the technology gets even cheaper, that percentage will go down.
If I could comment, David, about that briefly. We're on a small development, and we're the only house out of 10 that did this, because the builder's a small company, and they agreed very kindly to my request to put solar panels, the heat pump, and triple glazing on the house. So, and since then, it's kind of I guess you could say, a shop window for what they could do in other properties if they get the chance to build them. But it's been interesting how many people living in the other 9 have asked questions about them, about the things we did here, and are very interested, especially now, obviously, with the Ukrainian war. Some people are asking whether they can retrofit these things, which is good to hear. But the amount of ignorance out there is absolutely stunning, and people who really ought to know better. And it makes you think, where are people getting information about these technologies? Because it's not on the mainstream media. I mean, I consider myself a bit of an energy nerd. And as you know, David, I'm an academic in this field. So of course, I know more about it than most people. But people who, as I say, I would have expected to know a lot more, are surprisingly ignorant about heat pumps, about solar PV, about electric vehicles, all of this stuff in the transition. You've really got to look for the information. This isn't a criticism of your campaign at all. It's just a plea for how do we get stuff like this into the news, into the newspapers. Yes, I'm amazed by the absolute nonsense we hear. Stuff like, oh, you shouldn't put heat pumps in poorly insulated buildings. Well, no, you shouldn't put gas boilers in poorly insulated buildings. So it's a daft point to make. And this business, you hear something, oh, it doesn't heat things very well when it's cold. This is absolute nonsense. I mean, okay, admittedly, it hasn't been very tremendously cold this winter, but the coldest night still been able to leave the space heating part of the heat pump off all night long from midnight to 8 o'clock, and it's still at least 16 degrees by the morning. I mean, you know, and you get occasional problems with installations of heat pumps. You get
quite frequent problems with installations of gas boiler central heating as well. You know, the problems you get with that are legion. There is so much nonsense and disinformation about heat pumps around. And thanks for jumping in there, by the way, Rick. I know there's a guy called Pete Elliott. I don't know if he's had time to come in. He's a councillor in London who's going to want to say a few things. But no, Ali Ross. Ali Ross, are you? No. But anyway, let's have a look at a couple of these comments here. Mick Dunk says in Mendip, a developer, social housing provider, wanted to build over 190 homes with air source heat pumps, but the local grid supplier says they were unable to supply enough energy for the first place. Any comments, please?
Yeah.
No comments on that one. I'd have, but I don't know the circumstances.
Well, I can I jump in? I'm a Green Party district councillor, and we were flabbergasted when this happened because we've been sort of talking about, you know, energy efficiency to them, and suddenly they said that we're going to do a 41% increase in energy efficiency above the 2013 building regs, and they were going to put air source heat pumps in all the buildings, and I think they were going to put on social housing they were going to put solar panels. And so we started to push for them to do solar panels on all the buildings, but we had already been, you know, we were blown out of the water by their coming up to do this, because it's unheard of, absolutely unheard of. And then to find out that they couldn't do it because the grid isn't up to it. When you add up the extra currents taken by air source heat pumps, the extra current taken by a car charging point, which probably they would have put in as well, and also even things like induction hobs, I didn't realise they pull quite a bit of current at maximum. And they take the fact that everyone turns on everything at maximum at once, and they have to cope with that. And the grid isn't up to it. So the other problem is that not only is the government not doing its job elsewhere, but it hasn't even thought about the grid. And there are also problems with people who can't put solar online because that it won't take the power as well. So we've got to add that to the pressure to the government to get real and possibly even think about privatising the energy companies, or at least having a plan. I mean, a plan would be nice. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Pete Roach wants to come in, but before you do, can I just say about this business about lack of grid capacity? You know, the network providers are getting loads and loads more money coming in as planned electricity consumption increases because there's network distribution charges. They're getting a lot more money. They should be able to easily afford this. It's actually nonsense when there's another piece of nonsense I hear regularly. Oh, the grid is going to cost a lot of money to upgrade the grid. Where's the money coming from? Answer, it's coming from electricity charges that everybody pays. And the network distributors are getting this money. And what are they doing with it? Nothing, it seems, as what they should be doing. Anyway, sorry, Pete, you were going to say something now, Pete Roach?
Just in response to Mick, Mendip Council might want to get in touch with Stirling Council, where they've been doing some sterling work, installing solar panels on a lot of social housing. They had the same trouble with lack of grid capacity. So instead, they just installed batteries in the council houses as well. And that way, the grid company allowed them to carry on installing solar panels. So that's one way around it. I also wanted to mention a conversation that I've been having with a former Greenpeace campaign director, Chris Rose. He's been saying that when we're talking about energy efficiency as campaigners, we should be careful not to go off and use terms like demand side management and so on, and start talking more about energy waste and tackling energy waste, because that's exactly what it is. He also suggested that some of the big NGOs could build some energy efficient housing as an example, or do some retrofitting as examples. And when I put this to Andrew Warren, he said there's plenty of video footage already done by companies like Rockwall and so on, which shows houses that have been done. I had a bit of a search, but I couldn't find very much. I put one from Camden Council where they've done some great retrofitting in the middle of Camden on a council housing estate there. But that's perhaps the sort of thing that we could be pushing more on Twitter and Facebook.
Great. Yes. Yes. Great. Yeah, that's Pete. Charmian Larke, you want to say something?
Yeah, just about the grid, because one of the things I'm working on is some community-owned solar arrays. And we had 2 sites of 5 and 9 megawatts. And the Western Power Development, which is the local grid company, quoted reasonable cost for the grid connections, but 88% curtailment of the output, which obviously completely wipes out any financial return at all forever on the sites. So that apparently is a very common problem in the southwest for the whole of the Western Power area, which is also includes the Midlands and I think part of Wales, not sure. So, but to give them their due, Western Power is doing a lot of work, working with developers and people who say they want to do particular sites. So we partook of sending in a list of sites that we thought we wanted to get ahead with. And they are doing their best. I agree, it's not fast enough, but they are doing quite a lot in improving the grid, changing the substations, controls, and also more transmitters, bigger transformers at substations. But there is a massive task to try and turn the grid system around from how it was built to how it needs to be for our decentralized renewables future. But I don't know about the rest of the country, but certainly Western Power is doing quite a bit.
Okay, thanks, Charmian. J. Mark Dodds says, I live in an early Victorian stone-built end terrace, grade 2, listed in conservation area Northumberland. Huge south-west facing roof. Been wanting to get rid of gas altogether. All the companies that come to survey and the ones who don't turn up are dodgy. They're basically cowboys chasing grants. Well, if you look on things like Trustpilot and dedicated heat pump websites, you will see good companies and look for reviews. I'm not saying these retrofits will be cheap, but you can find companies who have a good track record. And you can always ask to go and look at one of their previous clients. Do things like that. You will find good people to do it. As well, getting solar PV in conservation areas, well, good luck on that one, I suppose. That's what we have to say on all suitable buildings. It basically means the exemption for conservation areas. We can discuss the rights and wrongs of that at a different time. On batteries, I'm a supporter of batteries. There's a debate about batteries. I'm a supporter of them. I mean, they're a great way of funding the grid stabilization and reducing the amount of generating capacity you have to have generally, because people will pay for it themselves, or at least it gets paid independently of the grid. And these economists get their spreadsheets out and say, oh, these big centralized batteries will be much more cost effective. Yeah, well, if they're being provided free by homeowners, they're going to be more cost effective than anything, is what I can say. No matter what else you say about it. So I'm a big supporter of them, solar PV, as well as solar PV. I know I've got one. I wish I'd got a bigger battery, is the only thing I would say. Anyway, right, more comments. It got me more comments. People are leaving. They've got lives to they've got lives to pursue. Yes, great. Susan Brush, electricity grid would benefit PV panels, not all south-facing, i.e. some facing towards southwest or even west. So output coincides more with times of greater demand for electricity, later afternoon, early evening, and reduced need for storage. Whole conversation, basically, we need to have very little storage, and we have very little storage and need much more. Well, yes, I mean, there are very few, there'll be extremely few times where buildings won't have some places where you put some solar PV that will give reasonably good effects. This advice for south facing, well, yes, that's where you get the best, but even if they're differently facing, the amount of reduction you get compared to south facing is actually rather less than what you might think. Yes.
Can we jump in? A few people got their hands up, yeah, noticing David.
Yeah, go on, Michelle. Sorry, yes, I missed it. Yeah.
It's actually Keith. I was in a health service meeting about GP surgeries, to apologise for not being here earlier. A couple of things I want to chip in on. One, obviously, the cost of the electrics, various levies should actually start to decrease, particularly as the feed-in tariffs drop out, because we've got this ratio, the price of gas to the price of electricity, that is quite key for a lot of new technologies. So the quicker we get the levies falling out the system for like feed-in tariffs, the more that ratio gets better. I'm all a fan of slightly west-facing solar panels. It's like a curve, the performance graph. So by pointing slightly to the west, you lose a few percent as you go a little bit to the west, but you obviously get more in the later afternoon. And it's really interesting about this 88% curtailment. I'm sure it's not 88% all the time, I hope, but it really is something we need to work on. Some curtailment gives an opportunity for batteries and storage, but obviously if you lose almost all your output, then it means the amount of batteries you need is too much. So I want to drop those couple of things in the mix. But I think the ratio of electric to gas prices is really important. If we want to get people to electrify, we need to be lobbying and working on how we get the electric price lower without causing fuel poverty by just loading it onto the gas.
Great. I've got something from Zoe. I've had resistance from management companies who look after existing blocks of flats, with them telling me that renewables, insulating, retrofitting are not in current legislation, that they are seen as an improvement. They're not seen as an improvement to current legislation, and therefore not in their remit to get quotes, apply for grants on behalf of residents. So is the next step for me to write to my MP to get the legislation updated for existing buildings? Absolutely. And I think in Scotland, they're ahead. If you look at the stuff that's going on there, they're ahead. Of course, Patrick Harvey is the Green Party guy running or trying to run the show there, at least. So maybe we should look at how further advanced that is there. But yes, definitely right to MPs. We need pressure on that one.
Can I add a little bit to that as
yes.
well? In that, I've actually had management companies not even put in their AGM meeting notes that I have brought up questions about retrofitting. They've actually completely omitted them from their minutes because they don't want other residents to ask them to get quotes to do retrofitting. I'm sure that can't be legal. No, I'm sure it isn't. Yeah, so activists to chase these things down. Yes. Now, J. Mark Dodds, it's not just domestic. Pubs are among the most energy guzzling buildings in the UK, and as public houses, pubs are immediately relatable by customers to their domestic situation. Anyone interested? I'm convening the People's Pub Partnership. Crowd-funded, that sounds like a good one, the People's Pub Partnership, marvellous. Crowd-funded proper pub company putting profit for the purpose pubs at the heart of the community. Be the change you want to see for a fossil fuel-free Green New Deal. Right, this is a pub company founded on public, I take it you mean public company or public pub company, I'm not sure which, founded on radical governance, which will
among other things, retrofit every pub it buys to operate fossil fuel free at the heart of the community, introducing local and regional sustainable supply chains, no global brands on the bar. We have a pub in Lincoln called the West End Tap, which is promising to be the proof of principle. This social enterprise is being designed to be open source, inviting anyone and everyone with ideas, interests, skills, and vision to contribute. The idea is to create a movement for change. And www.pubpartnership.co.uk, Twitter, jmarkpub, jmarkdodds, at jmarkdodds, at People's Pub Partnership, PT.
It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
And we've got the man himself.
Yeah, hello. Do you mind if I say something?
No, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
This is really interesting. I'm a domestic homeowner as well as an ex-publican, and in 2003 I had a pub in London called the Sun and Doves in Camberwell, and the energy bills were astonishing, horrifying, and I knew then that the cost of running the pub was only going to go up, and I needed to retrofit the pub. So I did all the research necessary to find out how much it would cost and what would need to be done to make it fossil fuel free. And it was all feasible at the time. Applied to the Carbon Trust for £110,000 match funded grant, raised the match funds, and the grant was rejected on the grounds that the application wasn't innovative, because all of the technologies we proposed to use to make the pub carbon zero were tried and tested, and what they were looking for was new innovative technology development, and so I didn't get the grant. Now, it was feasible to make pubs carbon zero in 2003, and it still hasn't been done. Roughly 150 pubs around the country which have been under threat have been bought by the local communities and converted into local pubs, and they're all successful. So this is a proposition which has been around for a long time, to raise a lot of money to set up a pub company, make all the pubs fossil fuel free, and just people walk into a lovely pub, think it's fantastic, get nice beers, and then they discover that it is possible to change everything by retrofitting buildings. But of course, every step along the way, what seems to be a no-brainer idea encounters all the problems everyone here encounters in their daily lives, which is there's an enormous pushback against any form of change towards decarbonising the economy. And we're all victim to the same thing. And none of it makes any sense, and it's largely because our politicians are, as we know they are. That's what the problem is. When the coalition government came in, they binned everything previous governments have been trying to do to decarbonise the economy, and this isn't said enough.
Oh, yes, indeed. They say they can't organise an energy efficiency retrofit programme. Well, the previous Labour government did do one, and it works.
Yeah,
whatever criticism you may about it. So what can one say? Now, sorry, Zoe, by the way, what's your second name? Zoe?
It's Tees. I'll change it on there. I'll rename myself.
Okay, right. Okay, so we've got quite a few more comments going. We have to finish soon, I think. Alfred Jones says, surprised that tidal energy is not getting much interest. Wind farms getting a lot of bad press recently. One-off land did know it's had to reduce its size. Pressure from the Welsh Tourist Board. Chris Keane, passive solar is almost invariably ignored as solar heating. Oh, we missed something. Yes, it is ignored, and it does. It does play an important role in various ways. We need another webinar on that. To save energy for air conditioning, says Chris Keane, we could build them like the one from St. Barbara, which is being reconstructed as Artifact in Germany, which has been designed to not require air conditioning. Oh, you mean, yes, I think I know what you mean. Naturally cool buildings. Okay, I think, and Dave Somerville, the best standard to push for is passive house standard for all new buildings. Absolutely, yes, of course. And NR fit for refurbishment, yes. So I think that's about it for today. And as I say, I think let's carry on, build this petition write to MPs. Let's think of more ways in which we can campaign. I'm pleased to see we have got a lot of people who've ticked the box, by the way, on the petition saying they want to receive further information on the campaign, which means we can write to them asking them, for instance, to do things like write to MPs, and we'll be doing more of that. So, you know, there's a lot more to do. Well, until we've achieved our purposes, that is mandatory solar PV, low carbon heating, which means usually heat pumps, and of course, maximizing fabric and associated energy efficiency through passive house. And with those thoughts, and of course, it's with the grassroots initiatives that will get places. They're an incredible source of innovation. And it's only then that the big companies and the government starts to copy them and so on and so forth. So let's get organizing on the grassroots, and let's push for legislation in and central government as well. Okay, so with that, I bid you farewell till next time.
David.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming. Cheers. Cheers,
Bye-bye.
Becky. Bye.
Hi everybody. Sorry I was at an NHS thing today.
Oh, that's all right. Don't worry about it.
Bye,
everyone.
We'll have a directors meeting soon. Cheers. Bye.
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 Pubs, though. I think that'd be a really good, a good thing to start the push. And
Sorry, what did you say? What would be really good?
the zero carbon pubs.
Oh yeah. Oh,
no
marvelous. Yes. Zero carbon. As long as they haven't got zero beer.
I think some of the breweries are going that way. So pubs seem to be there's far more pubs than there are breweries. So if we start to get some momentum on that, that'd be great.
But the thinking is, if you can't do it in your home, you can put money into buying part of a pub and get it done in your pub locally, and then use the pub as a release for all of your frustrations about everything else, and go and talk in a fake fact-free environment about what's going on everywhere else where it's all lies and nonsense. It's true though. Thanks for the time, David. I really appreciate it.
It's okay. Thanks for your contribution.
Thank you. I'm afraid I don't know how I came across the webinar, and I would like to follow up anyway, so I will, David.
Well, look, join our email group, and you can sign up for our posts and things if you go to our website.
Right. Okay, I'll do that now. All right. Thank you very much. Okay.
Cheers. Great.
Bye.
Keep it. Yeah. Keep it. Okay. Cheers. When are you free for a directors meeting, by the way, Keith? Is it Monday?
I've got no idea. Everything's sort of manically busy at the moment as we go into election season. Usually the daytimes and mornings is fairly quiet.
Daytimes, mornings. Okay, maybe next Tuesday morning then.
I'll have to go upstairs and look at my calendar. I'll send you check my emails, but I think that's probably okay.
Okay, great. Anyway, goodbye to everybody.
Okay, bye.
Cheers. Bye.